Lisa Carter wakes up shortly after 2:00 a.m. inside a silent lakeside campground in the Oregon wilderness, and for a moment nothing feels unusual. The fire is still faintly glowing, the tents are still standing, and the forest outside is calm enough to seem harmless. But when she turns toward her son's tent, she notices something that makes her freeze completely. 16-year-old Ethan Carter is not inside. His sleeping bag is untouched, his flashlight is missing, and the zipper of his tent is pulled wide open as if he left in a hurry. The only thing that remains exactly where it should not be are his shoes, placed neatly beside the dying campfire as though he never intended to walk far at all. At first, Lisa tries to convince herself this is simple. Maybe he stepped away, maybe he needed air, maybe he is just nearby in the dark. But that thought collapses the moment her phone suddenly lights up in her hand. The caller ID shows a name she never expected to see in the middle of the night. Ethan Carter. Her heart reacts before her mind does. She answers immediately, calling his name, expecting relief, expecting his voice, expecting anything that makes sense. But what comes through the speaker is not Ethan speaking. It is silence followed by slow, uneven breathing, close enough that it feels like whoever is on the other end is standing just outside the tent. Then faint sounds break through. Branches snapping somewhere deep in the forest, something moving between trees that are far too dark to see clearly. The breathing continues for a few seconds longer, then the call abruptly ends. Lisa stands completely still, trying to process what just happened, but nothing about it fits together. Why would her son's phone be active if he is not there? Why would he call her without speaking? And why does it sound like he is not alone? Outside, the forest remains quiet, but now it no longer feels empty. Every shadow between the trees suddenly feels closer than it should. And as Lisa looks toward Ethan's empty tent again, one question becomes impossible to ignore. If Ethan didn't walk away on his own, then who or what was breathing into his phone from somewhere inside that forest? Ethan Carter had already started changing long before the camping trip ever began, in ways that didn't seem dramatic at first but slowly reshaped the entire atmosphere inside the Carter household. He became quieter at dinner, shorter in conversation, and increasingly distant from moments that used to feel normal between him and his parents. Lisa Carter noticed it most clearly in the small things: the way he stopped asking questions, the way he kept his phone face down at the table, and the way he seemed to drift mentally even when he was physically present. She believed this camping trip deep in the Oregon wilderness might be the one chance to pull her family back together again. Daniel Carter, his father, saw it differently. He believed Ethan was simply growing into a teenager who needed space, not supervision. In his mind, removing distractions like school pressure, friends, and especially the phone would naturally reset the distance between them. So the plan was simple: 3 days in a remote forest with no signal, no internet, and no outside world pulling them in different directions. When the Carter family arrives deep inside the Oregon wilderness, the change is immediate and undeniable. There is no cell service, no background noise from civilization, and no digital escape for anyone. At first, this silence feels uncomfortable, almost unfamiliar, but slowly it begins to shape something closer to connection. They set up camp beside a still lake surrounded by dense trees, and for the first time in a long while, they share meals without interruptions. Ethan even participates more than expected. He helps set up gear, he joins the fishing attempt with his father, and for a short window of time there is laughter around the fire that feels almost natural again. Lisa allows herself to believe this trip is working. Daniel even comments that Ethan seems better already. But what none of them fully realize is that Ethan is still slipping away internally, even while sitting right beside them. The first warning signs return faster than anyone expects. Ethan begins checking his phone repeatedly, even though there is no service, as if expecting something that doesn't require a connection. Whenever Lisa glances toward him, he quickly locks the screen, hiding whatever he is looking at. Daniel notices it too, but chooses not to confront it, assuming it is just habit he will outgrow once he adjusts to being offline. Then something more unsettling happens. Ethan receives multiple silent notifications from an unknown number, his expression changing each time they appear, but he refuses to explain what they are or who they are from. Lisa tries asking casually, but Ethan gives short answers that shut the conversation down completely. The emotional distance between them doesn't explode outward, it tightens quietly, like pressure building beneath the surface without release. Then the situation shifts in a way neither parent is prepared for. After sunset, when the forest outside the camp grows darker and the silence becomes heavier, Ethan suddenly stands up from the fire without warning. He says he's going for a walk. There is no discussion, no explanation, and no visible emotion attached to the decision. Daniel tells him it's late, suggesting he should wait until morning, but Ethan does not respond. He simply turns and walks toward the trees, disappearing past the edge of the firelight without once looking back at his parents. For a moment, Lisa assumes he will circle back within minutes. Daniel assumes he just needs space to clear his head. But as the minutes stretch into longer silence, neither of them moves to follow. Hours pass, the campfire weakens, The forest remains completely still as if it has absorbed the sound of his departure, and Ethan Carter does not return. Night settles over the Oregon forest differently than it did before. It doesn't feel like simple darkness anymore. It feels heavier, almost compressed, as if the trees themselves are closing in tighter around the Carter campsite. The lake that once looked calm now reflects almost nothing, just a dull surface that seems to absorb what little light remains. Inside the tent, Lisa Carter keeps waking up in short, uneasy intervals, each time expecting to hear Ethan's footsteps returning. Daniel Carter stays quiet, but his awareness is sharpened now. Something about Ethan walking into the woods and not coming back is no longer registering as normal teenage behavior. Then the atmosphere shifts in a way that forces both of them fully awake. From somewhere beyond the edge of the campsite, the family dog suddenly growls, low and sustained, aimed directly into the tree line. Daniel steps outside first, scanning the dark forest with a flashlight, while Lisa follows close behind. For a few seconds nothing responds, then a faint light appears between the trees, moving slowly and unevenly as if someone is holding a flashlight but not walking with confidence. Daniel calls out for Ethan, but the sound disappears into the forest without an answer. The light flickers once, then vanishes completely. At that same moment, Ethan briefly returns to the edge of the campsite. He says nothing at first. Daniel tries to speak to him, but the exchange escalates quickly into a tense, short argument that neither parent fully understands. Ethan's voice is low, defensive, and unfamiliar. Then suddenly, without warning, he turns and walks back into the trees again. This time there is no hesitation, no flashlight, no visible direction. Just Ethan disappearing completely into darkness that seems to swallow him immediately. Lisa Carter wakes in panic later that night, unsure how much time has passed. The fire is nearly gone now, reduced to faint embers. Daniel is already moving through the campsite, checking tents, calling Ethan's name more urgently. But the realization comes quickly and all at once. Ethan is gone. His tent is still perfectly in place, zipped and undisturbed. His phone is missing. His shoes are gone too, removed from where they were previously left near the fire. There are no signs of struggle, no overturned gear, no visible disturbance in the campsite at all. Everything looks almost untouched except for the fact that their son has completely vanished from it. Search efforts begin immediately inside the surrounding forest. Daniel moves ahead with a flashlight while Lisa follows, calling Ethan's name into the trees. Rangers are contacted, but before they even arrive, the first physical evidence is found. Fresh footprints lead away from the campsite, pressed into the soft forest ground, still clear enough to suggest recent movement. Then investigators notice something more concerning. A second set of tracks runs parallel to Ethan, matching his direction step for a short distance before both sets fade deeper into uneven terrain. There is no clear trail after that point. No obvious exit path, just movement deeper into the forest with no indication of where it leads or who else might have been walking beside him. Then Lisa's phone suddenly rings again. The screen lights up with the same name she saw earlier that night, Ethan Carter. Her hands shake before she even answers. When she finally does, there is only static at first. Long, unstable silence filled with interference. Then Ethan's voice comes through, faint and broken, as if he is speaking from far away or from inside something blocking the sound. He says only one word at first, "Mom," followed by a pause that stretches too long to feel natural. Then he speaks again, barely audible, telling her not to let him find him. There is no explanation, no clarity, only fear carried through a voice that sounds like it is under extreme pressure. Before Lisa can respond, a distant scream cuts through the forest outside the call. It is not coming through the phone, it is coming from somewhere inside the trees themselves. The line immediately goes dead. Silence returns instantly, but it no longer feels empty. At that moment, one fact becomes impossible to ignore. Something in this forest is actively moving with Ethan Carter, and whatever it is, he is trying not to be found by it. Police and forest rangers arrive at the Carter campsite just after first light, turning the quiet forest into a controlled zone of urgency. Radios crackle constantly. Officers spread out in widening patterns between the trees while search teams establish a perimeter around the lake. Within minutes, search helicopters begin circling above the canopy, their spotlights cutting through the forest in slow, deliberate sweeps. Tracking dogs are deployed next, immediately locking onto Ethan Carter's scent trail from the campsite. For a short distance, everything appears to be moving in a clear direction, as if Ethan left a readable path behind him. But that sense of clarity does not last. As the dogs reach the shoreline of the lake, their behavior changes abruptly. They slow down, hesitate, then begin circling without commitment. Moments later, the trail simply stops at the water's edge, as if Ethan Carter's presence ends there completely. Search teams widen their coverage immediately, and that is when the first wave of physical evidence begins to surface. Near a cluster of reeds not far from the shoreline, investigators recover a broken flashlight, its lens cracked and partially submerged in mud. A few meters away, a hoodie is found tangled in low brush, heavy with damp soil, as though it was dropped in a rush or pulled off during movement through rough terrain. The condition of the items suggests recent activity, but nothing about their placement explains direction or intent. Then, as searchers push deeper into the forest beyond the lake, they discover something even more unsettling. A hidden campsite carefully concealed further inland, not registered in any official park records. Inside are basic survival supplies, food remnants, and signs that someone had been staying there long enough to establish routine. But what stands out most are the markings carved into nearby trees, irregular and deliberate, forming patterns that do not match standard trail or ranger indicators. They look intentional, but their meaning is unclear. As investigators process the scene, a new pattern begins to emerge through archived reports and local records. Officials uncover references to other disappearances in the same forest stretching back several years, cases that were never fully resolved and were quietly filed away due to lack of evidence. The proximity of those incidents to Ethan Carter's location forces the current search into a wider investigative scope. What initially appeared to be an isolated missing persons case now begins to overlap with older, unanswered events tied to the same geographic area. Then another transmission interrupts the operation. Lisa's phone rings again, displaying ETHAN Carter for the third time. The connection is unstable, filled with static and distortion, but Ethan's voice is once again present, weaker than before and more fragmented. He begins speaking, but before he can complete a full sentence, a second voice cuts in briefly through the same line. It is male, calm, and sharply distinct from Ethan's tone. The voice says only one sentence, cold and direct. "You shouldn't have answered." The line immediately drops, leaving silence so abrupt it feels unnatural compared to everything before it. And what they found near the shoreline moments later changed everything investigators thought they understood about Ethan Carter's disappearance. If you're following this case, subscribe, because what happened next inside that forest was never fully explained. Ethan Carter's phone signal suddenly reappears on the tracking system hours into the expanded search operation, pulling investigators away from the lake and deeper into an unmarked section of the Oregon forest. The signal is weak, unstable, and moving in short bursts before locking onto a fixed point that does not match any official trail routes. Rangers immediately redirect the search units toward the location, which is identified as an abandoned fire watch station that has been off-grid for years and no longer maintained by park services. As the team approaches, the structure becomes visible above the treeline, a decaying tower surrounded by dense brush and broken fencing, suggesting long-term isolation from regular human activity. Inside the fire watch station, investigators find immediate signs that Ethan Carter has been there recently. Sleeping gear is scattered near the lower level, with food supplies partially opened and left out as if used in a hurry. Ethan's backpack is recovered intact, confirming he made it to this location physically. But despite clear evidence of recent occupation, there is no sign of Ethan himself, no footprints leading out in any consistent direction, no clear indication of where he went next. It is as if he vanished again from inside a place that should have contained him. As forensic teams begin examining the structure more closely, a deeper investigative twist emerges through digital recovery efforts and device analysis. Authorities confirm that Ethan Carter had been in repeated contact over several months with an anonymous online figure using a survivalist identity. The communications were not random or brief. They were structured, persistent, and increasingly influential over time. Messages recovered from encrypted backups show a gradual shift in tone, where Ethan was told repeatedly that the outside world was unsafe, that his parents could not be trusted, and that true safety only existed within isolation, specifically inside the forest environment. Investigators begin to understand that Ethan's disappearance did not begin with a single moment in the campsite. It was the result of sustained psychological influence that extended far beyond the camping trip itself. This realization shifts Lisa Carter's understanding completely. Standing inside the abandoned station, she is forced to confront the fact that the forest did not create the situation. It only became the final stage of something that had already been developing long before the family ever arrived in Oregon. The emotional weight of that conclusion changes the direction of the entire investigation, as authorities now begin tracing Ethan's digital history instead of focusing only on physical movement through the forest. During the search of the station, investigators recover Ethan's journal tucked beneath a collapsed wooden panel near the interior wall. Inside, a single written line stands out clearly, repeated with uneven handwriting. He said the forest is the only safe place. The statement confirms that Ethan was not acting purely on impulse or confusion, but following a belief that had been reinforced externally over time. It connects directly to the online messages and suggests a deliberate psychological narrative had been constructed around him. As investigators process this final piece of evidence, digital forensic teams identify a breakthrough in the communication records. The anonymous survivalist persona behind the messages has finally been traced to a real identity connected to multiple encrypted accounts operating across different regions. For the first time since Ethan Carter disappeared, authorities are closing in on the individual responsible for shaping his actions. But before they can confirm full identification or location, the trail goes dark again, leaving investigators with more questions than answers and a growing sense that the case is far from reaching its conclusion. The identity of the anonymous survivalist is finally confirmed through digital forensic tracing and hidden communication logs recovered from Ethan Carter's phone. Investigators discover a man living off-grid deep within the Oregon wilderness, a former survivalist who had been removed from multiple communities years earlier after repeatedly violating safety restrictions and disappearing into restricted forest zones. He had been operating quietly under false identities online, reaching out through anonymous accounts and slowly building trust with vulnerable teenagers over long periods of time. The pattern was always the same: small conversations at first, shared frustrations, then gradual isolation, language disguised as understanding, messages suggesting the outside world was unsafe, messages planting doubt about parents, teachers, and anyone asking questions. Ethan Carter had been receiving these messages for months before the camping trip ever began, each conversation pulling him further away from his family without them noticing how deep it had already gone. The search operation shifts immediately once this digital trail is confirmed. Tactical teams are redeployed deeper into the forest, focusing on older ranger paths and abandoned structures previously dismissed as irrelevant. Hours pass with no success until a thermal sweep from a low-flying helicopter detects a faint heat signature beneath a collapsed section of ground near an old drainage ridge. Ground teams move in carefully and begin clearing debris by hand. What they uncover is a hidden underground shelter, partially reinforced with salvaged wood and insulated material. Inside, they find Ethan Carter, alive, shaking, disoriented, wearing the same clothes from the night he vanished. His eyes struggle to adjust as officers speak his name repeatedly, trying to bring him back to the present moment. The space around him contains survival supplies, water containers, and makeshift bedding, confirming he had been held in isolation rather than lost in the forest as initially assumed. Outside the shelter, the survivalist is gone. No footprints leading away are clearly preserved, no vehicle tracks, no immediate direction of escape. It is as if he understood the timing of the rescue and vanished just before contact. Investigators later confirm he had knowledge of terrain routes unknown to most search teams, explaining how he stayed ahead of detection for so long. The disappearance of the suspect becomes its own mystery within the case. In the hours following Ethan's recovery, investigators conduct a full medical and psychological evaluation. During questioning, Ethan slowly begins to describe what happened in fragmented pieces. He explains that the man online never introduced himself with real identity, only understanding. Ethan says he felt listened to in ways he never experienced at home during the months leading up to the trip. He describes late-night messages that felt personal, as if someone was paying attention when no one else was. Over time, those messages shifted from comfort to instruction. The idea of the forest being a safe place became repeated until it no longer felt like a suggestion but a certainty. Lisa Carter breaks down after hearing her son's account. She realizes the emotional separation did not begin the night of the camping trip or even during the days leading up to it. It had been forming quietly long before, in the space between silence, misunderstanding, and digital influence that no one in the family recognized early enough. The forest did not create the separation. It only became the place where it finally surfaced in full. Months pass after Ethan Carter's recovery, and life for the Carter family does not return to what it once was. The house is quieter now, not because the danger is gone, but because everyone has become more careful with words, with space, with silence itself. Ethan sits in his room for long periods without speaking much, often staring at his phone but rarely using it the way he once did. Lisa Carter moves through daily routines with a constant awareness that something fundamental has shifted inside her home, even though nothing physical appears different on the surface. Daniel Carter tries to return to normal structure, work, and schedules, but even he speaks more softly now, as if afraid that raising his voice might reopen something they barely survived. As the investigation formally winds down, authorities compile the full case report. What they confirm reshapes how the entire disappearance is understood. Ethan Carter was not simply lost in the Oregon forest. He had been gradually isolated through sustained digital contact that exploited emotional vulnerability over time. Investigators highlight patterns of manipulation that included gradual trust building, emotional reinforcement, and repeated framing of the outside world as unsafe. They also confirm similar communication attempts had been identified in unrelated cases involving other teenagers, though not all resulted in physical disappearance. The case becomes part of a wider discussion on how anonymous online influence can extend into real-world behavior without immediate detection. Then a new development interrupts what was expected to be a closed case. A digital monitoring team reviewing archived data discovers that the anonymous survivalist accounts connected to Ethan Carter's case have become active again. At first, it appears like residual automated activity or old credentials still being accessed, but deeper analysis confirms something more concerning. New messages are being posted. New interactions are occurring under the same identities that were supposed to be permanently shut down. Authorities trace login activity across multiple regions, but each attempt leads to dead ends, suggesting whoever is using the accounts understands digital tracking systems well enough to avoid sustained detection. Investigators quietly reopen a portion of the case, focusing now not only on what happened to Ethan Carter, but on who may still be operating behind the same network of influence. No public statement is released, but internal concern grows as patterns begin to resemble earlier behavior seen before Ethan's disappearance. The forest is no longer the only place under scrutiny. The online space that reached into it is now part of the investigation again. In the final review of the case, one question remains unanswered and continues to divide investigators and observers alike. Was Ethan Carter purely manipulated by one isolated individual acting alone, or was he influenced by something broader that extended beyond a single person and into a system that still exists today, operating quietly in the background? The official case may have closed, but the final question remains open. Even after the Carter case was officially marked as resolved, investigators noted something unusual in their internal reports. Similar patterns began appearing in unrelated missing persons files across different states, each involving teenagers who had shown sudden behavioral shifts before disappearing or being recovered. The details never matched perfectly, but the structure felt familiar enough to raise quiet concern among analysts reviewing long-term digital influence cases. Nothing publicly connected them, yet internally, the pattern recognition teams kept flagging the same warning signs: isolation behavior, anonymous online contact, and unexplained emotional withdrawal shortly before critical incidents. Then another development surfaced that reignited attention within investigative circles. A separate family in a different state reported receiving repeated phone calls from a number that had been officially deactivated years earlier following a missing person case. The calls contained no clear speech at first, only static and distant breathing similar to what Lisa Carter heard the night Ethan's phone first rang in the forest. When investigators reviewed the call logs, they confirmed the number had no active carrier assignment, no SIM registration, and no traceable source through standard telecom systems. Yet the calls continued intermittently, always at irregular hours, always ending before any clear conversation could be recorded. As this new case quietly developed, analysts compared it with the Carter investigation and found overlapping behavioral indicators that could not be ignored. While there was no confirmed link, the similarities were enough for law enforcement to reopen archived files for cross-reference. Ethan Carter's case, once believed to be contained, now sits alongside other unresolved anomalies being studied for potential connections. The forest incident, the online influence patterns, and the unexplained communications are all being reviewed under a broader investigative category focused on long-term behavioral manipulation and digital identity persistence. For Lisa Carter, these developments bring a complicated sense of closure mixed with lingering uncertainty. Ethan is home, safe, and physically recovered, but the questions surrounding how deeply the influence reached, and whether it truly ended, remain part of their reality. The family has not spoken publicly since the last official statement, choosing instead to stay away from attention as the broader investigation continues evolving without clear resolution. And so the final question remains, not only for investigators but for anyone following the case. If patterns like this can repeat across different families, different locations, and different timelines, then what exactly ended in that forest and what might still be continuing somewhere else right now? If you think this case is disturbing, wait until you hear what happened when another family started receiving calls from someone who officially disappeared years ago. Subscribe for more true mystery documentaries.